What's going on, Pro EDU community? It's Dustin Valkema, and our Pro EDU tutorial on the Air Dusties is out, and this was a really fun project where you got to see the process that I used from start to finish on creating not only catalog images, but also kind of a cool commercial style ad image of these shoes, and it was a really cool exploration of a new colorway. And I'm joined today by Seth McCullough. He's an awesome retoucher, commercial, high level, great stuff. And what we're going to do is actually take a dive into my post-production file here in Photoshop and have a discussion on what the high-level retouching process looks like, and he gets to react to my scene file.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, this this image is amazing. I mean, it's crazy. I saw this online a while ago, and I've worked on a lot of CG post work, basically, which you did all of that yourself here, because that's part of your craft. It's like the CG and the post is where you bring it all together,
right,
and make this, this all the effects and all the depth. And I'm always curious how far you guys take things before you say, that's it, I'm going into post. And so that's the rare occasion that I get to like crack open these files and see what you actually did inside.
I was a bit nervous. I won't lie. I was a bit nervous here.
You know what? I mean, I bet just looking through this, I'm going to learn some stuff that like I didn't even know, honestly. That's why I love snooping on people's files.
For sure.
So tell me how you first set it up. You've got this beauty layer.
Yeah, so the beauty layer, and this is definitely a spot for me that we can kind of hold, I guess, and talk about before we move on. And what our plan here is, he's just going to go layer by layer all the way up the stack here of in the file, and we're just going to discuss a few things. But the starting point for me was getting an image that was good in 3D, and then knowing what's possible in post and being able to push that. And this is something that we can quickly discuss, because there are times, even when photographing, where I'm like, hey, it's not perfect in camera, and I don't really like the term perfect, and I used to consider myself a perfectionist, and I realized that it was just killing my creativity, because I was stalling and stopping a lot of the work that could be done. Say portfolio work, for example, I would sit there and work on one piece for 2 weeks, and I'm like, man, this just isn't, it's never good enough. And then when you become okay with finished and not perfect, you start to get a lot more work done, and it kind of helps your creativity flourish. So in this tutorial, we get to a point where I see the vision, and I know that I have everything I need, and that's what this beauty pass is here. It's just that the base kind of raw render out of Cinema 4D and Octane, and then plenty of render layers that we'll talk about here in a moment.
Yeah.
So what is your thought, like when you're doing work? Like, do you have these points where you get to a point and say whatever, for you it'd more than likely be Photoshop, but you're like, hey, this is finished. Yeah. It's not perfect. Like, what are your views on that?
Well, I think part of it is like keeping that flow, basically, because I think when you're being creative, and you're doing creative work, you have to keep moving forward at a pace that like kind of keeps you engaged with it. Right. I think in order to have any of that, like any of those real like sort of powerful things that you stumble on, basically, through exploration. So I see a lot of times I'll get maybe assets from photographers for compositing, and I'll see in what they gave me that maybe they went too far in their shots, and I'm like, I already got what I need here, So yeah, it's important. It's important to know when to stop fiddling with like one part of the production and move on to maybe using different tools or techniques, or maybe like, bringing in some visual effects or something like that. But yeah, knowing when not to noodle all over the details constantly until until every single molecule is finished is what we want to do.
Right. You don't get a whole lot done that way.
No, you don't.
Sometimes it's a very rare occasion that I've ever found myself, including commercial client work, you know, where I've had to find myself really like pixel peeping it and being zoomed in at 800%. You know, you have those rare clients, and you know, as you start to move higher up, you know, the level of client, like it happens.
Yeah.
But knowing where you can start the next process
Yeah.
is definitely vital. It's kind of what I refer to often as the balance between what you need to have done in one package and then move on to the next.
Yeah, because there's sort of a law of diminishing returns, right? And I'm sure in CG that's like super important because you can burn hours trying to once you go down the rabbit hole.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, cool. Let's check this out. I'm like really looking forward to stealing your secrets. So this beauty layer, this is straight out of C4D.
That is straight out of C4D. Yep.
No manipulation, and you put this camera raw filter on it. It looks like to add some clarity to kind of bump it up.
Yep.
A little punch, right?
Just a punch.
Okay, cool. So this light pass 2 layer, it's set to screen. And it looks like you've just applied it to the left shoe there.
Yep. And so what that is it's a render pass, as you'll see here, that is just that one single light that I could use to boost that front shoe just a little bit more by itself.
So yeah, you're basically sculpting the space by turning lights on and off and giving yourself more tools to use as layers. And that's at 100%. So that's the nice flexible, you know, way of working with these layers is you can apply them as different blend modes. You can also like reduce opacities, stuff like that. So what about this shadow layer? Is that another? So that's multiply. So yeah, I love looking at these in normal mode because, you know, who would ever think to output something like that?
Right.
You know you're going to use that on multiply, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And if you turn off the smart filters there, you'll see, you know, kind of where that sits at its raw state.
Gotcha.
A lot of times I'll use it, you know, just as it is, and there's other times where I want to boost it, you know, just kind of hit it with levels and kind of increase the contrast in that a bit, just to choke down some of the shadows that are really being produced by it. But overall, you know, this is among my favorite passes for 3D work because it, you know, simply placing it there in the scene. If you set it to something like soft light, it's just like snappy contrast, overlays kind of the same way.
Yeah.
And it gives you a lot of contrast that you didn't initially have.
So you kind of know after working with these different outputs, these different layers, that I'm getting to the shadow one and that's going to add a bunch of punch right now. And you switch it. Yeah. So ambient occlusion, explain what that means.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and just change that to normal mode and we can talk about that. So ambient occlusion is the effect, if you were to maybe take a very overcast, you know, like ambient lighting, this would be all of the shadowing that would happen on the objects that are based a little bit more on proximity to one another.
Okay.
So the closer the object is to another, you're going to have more of a shadow there and then soft transitions in between. So if we go ahead and take this, because I did pop this with levels as well. So this is what we would get straight out of the box here. And you can actually in 3D adjust the values of, you know, how tight knit those shadows are. But the ambient occlusion pass is really good for adding all of these little fine details in the cracks and crevices of your render with, you know, without having to say go in and dodge and burn these areas or like really, you know, go in with multiple different layers and curves and masks and everything else.
Yeah.
A lot of times you can get away with just say the shadow pass and an ambient occlusion, and then kind of as I did here, you know, as we start to work up the stack, start to place your other light layers on top of that.
So I'm curious the difference between that and shadow. Crazy.
Yeah, they're,
So
they're
yeah,
definitely it's very overcast looking.
yeah, I really see what you mean because it's not. It's much less directional.
Right.
All right. Let's see if I can remember how you got all of these set. This one was
Multiply. Probably. Who knows?
Because you could potentially just be going through like this and be
Definitely. And that's what you get when you start kind of speaking to it a little bit with the shadow passes. If you go to a soft light or you go to an overlay, it's just, you instantly get bits of contrast that you didn't have before. And so there are times where I'll use it on a soft light that kind of flattens out just a little bit, but then you can bring on curves on top of that and like really punch specific areas for contrast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So you kind of have a plan now, I'm guessing, when you go in that like all of these sort of have your like workflow plugged into them. You're going to use these for kind of the same thing each time. Is that
for the
right?
most part. And I actually, I've been trying to actually get further away from the mindset of like, this is my workflow and the way that I use these, because there's been times even during production here on various tutorials where I have a happy accident and I'm just like, you know what? That kind of sticks. I've never used it like that, but that definitely sticks. And so we've just ran with it. But most often, I go through the process of having the beauty layer and then my shadow passes, then my reflection or light passes before my reflection, and then start to build up into the effects and atmosphere and then grading, so on. Generally a fairly somewhat set structure, but with the way that all of these layers work together, it works best normally if you have them, built kind of how you would think of it in the real world.
So is the flow basically like getting the shape down, then moving into spatial stuff, environmental stuff, and then FX stuff on top of that?
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. It's building for me at least, it's building a good core around the focal subject, which in this case are the shoes, and just, giving those a good pop and focusing a little bit more on the actual shoe than the entire environment. And then as I start to get into the various effects and the atmosphere, that's just pulling everything in the depth out of the scene to really place focus from a wider perspective. So
are you ever jumping back into C4D because maybe you had an idea to output a different layer or something like that?
There are definitely times that I have in the past, and I've fought myself very much on not going back, more with personal work. It's because I really try to force myself. Like I'm constantly learning, it's finished. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's finished. Like, go ahead and move on. And if I go back to Cinema 4D, it's usually because I made a mistake somewhere and I'm like, I really need that one. But oftentimes, I'll allow myself to export sometimes more render layers than I need, and I'll just delete those as I find I don't need them.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you output all of these in one go?
Yeah, all of these are generally one go.
Okay.
And with the way that render times work now with GPU systems, I believe this scene here was a 10-minute render, and it was finished, so
that's pretty.
Adding
pretty
more
fast,
passes isn't quite what it used to be, where we'd sit for 6, 7, 10 hours waiting.
Sounds like fun while it's cooking.
Yeah, we'd just sit and cooking all day.
Yeah. So the reflection pass looks like it's just doing that. It's looking for any of the like shiny stuff in the image and just kind of like pumping that up.
Yep.
So that's cool. You're using smart filters on each of these layers in order to just affect the contrast of the layer itself. It's sort of like the fine-tuning controls of the output that you created.
Right. as non-destructively as possible. So this is actually, I may not go back to Cinema 4D all the time, but this is definitely one of those that I may, in future productions, if you guys see this and it's down the road, I may stop doing smart objects all the time, because it does give you the flexibility to go back and tweak. And there's a lot of time that, you know, and this is just more from industry experience, you know, and dealing with clients that have feedback and you have to change things.
Yeah.
But when it's much more creative work, there are definitely times that I make the adjustment and I move on and commit to it.
Yeah.
But it's quite difficult for me to do.
Yeah, it is good in this case, especially if you're dealing with those changes, because you can just double click on this, open it up, and replace it with an updated reflection layer that you output from C4D.
Yeah.
Okay, emitters. That automatically like sounds really cool.
Yeah, so this is all just based off of the one material that I had within all of these cube microchip objects that would emit light. And so what I use that pass for is, as I'm starting to build my composite and I'm darkening things away, I use that pass to like really go almost locally at times and say, hey, this is where I want these lights to pop through.
Oh, that's cool.
And so it helps with that while still giving a hint of those lights in all of the other darker areas.
Yeah, and so I see like you used a pretty light touch on the mask.
Yep.
All right, diffuse. What's that do?
So the diffuse is actually really just the opposite of reflection. So reflection is the surface reflection. The diffuse is just color with lighting information. So it's just raw color. There's no reflection, no glossiness to it. So when you use these two layers, if we go ahead here and maybe hide this. So this is what our diffuse pass would look like, as opposed to the reflection would just be those surface reflections from everything else in the environment. So what I use these for is kind of cutting down the time that I take to focus on certain areas. So for instance, like these shoelaces here, you know, they're quite reflective, and that's because I made other adjustments in the scene. And a lot of times when I'm starting to build the base composite, I will just put things together, see how they work, and then I start to use another pass like this just to simply cut down on the reflection, say, of the sole area here on the shoelaces. And that allows me to kind of keep the flow of working before I get too nitpicky on just that one pass.
Yeah, that's what
very easy to do.
That's what I was going to ask, is basically you're thinking ahead because you know what you can output, and you could burn hours trying to get everything perfect in a single scene. But, you know, just as a photographer capturing plates, you're like, I'm not going to screw with that right now. I'm going to hit that with the occlusion, with the diffuse layer.
Yeah, and there's plenty of times a lot of times I tell people when they ask like how I do this, and I'm no BS about it. Like if I can get from point A to point B, like as much as I love Cinema 4D, Octane, CGI as a whole, I love post-production. So I treat it very much even like my photography. When I'm shooting cosplayers, I like to shoot the photos, and it doesn't have to be completely perfect because I know what I can do in Photoshop, and like that's kind of my playground there. So as we're starting to do these tutorials, you know, they're wrapped around showing you how to get all of the detail, but then also understanding that there's a balance between, as you said, diminishing returns and progression. And so as we start to work through it, they're able to see what the process is to get there, and if they want to push it further, they can. And then other times there's certain things like all of the decals and logos that we placed on the shoe where we went back in and, you know, really fine tune a lot of these, you know, various elements.
Would you be able to make this just in CG? Like what you created with this piece here? Would it be possible to not have to be jumping into post?
Yes, dumb close. And so in going through that process, the primary reason why I don't like to do that in most of my experience is, especially for something like this that you would imagine going to a client. Now, if you spend that time in 3D, that requires, you know, re-renders and various things. Like, you know, reshooting is, you know, what we would consider, say, a re-render. Like, we don't do it all the time. But more often than not, given the workflow, especially that I use with my clients, given the workflow of getting cameras and lighting approved first, once we do the materials and we start to build towards a final render, most of their adjustments are going to be in post. And so
Yeah.
if I build all of that in the 3D software, that means I have to re-render that entire scene all the way over instead of just adjusting a layer mask, like kind of painting the little thing out.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can definitely do a lot of this, and you can spend a lot of time. It may have taken me twice as long, at least, to replicate this type of work. And you can still do color grading. You can still do, say, throw LUTs on your 3D renders before they're even exported. But it's just not the same to me.
But do you think that is more a limitation of the tools and the current technology that we have? Like, do you see it going more towards where CG artists will be doing more of this post work in CG as those tools evolve? Or do you see Photoshop as always having this important place in the work?
It's hard to say because, though we teach Cinema 4D, Blender, for instance, has a compositing package built right into it, and I don't personally have experience with it, but things are already starting to go that route where some of these softwares are offering a full package, but I don't know if I could really live.
I always
with
wonder
myself
if that's a good
saying,
idea. I mean, we talk about like software trying to offer like too much when we have these tools that are already doing it great. Right.
Use the tools that do it best and move on.
Yeah.
And the tools that I use may not be the same tools that the next person will want to use. And we have this conversation all the time between Blender and Cinema 4D, and one's free, one costs, and it's just like I use what I like to use. I don't knock your software just because you use it. Yeah. I know Blender is a great software. It's a great free software. I find value in Cinema 4D, and there's things that I enjoy about it, so I pay for that. And that's kind of no different than our vehicles or our clothes. Some people value their shoes more than others, and when I'm on the clearance rack and my son's rocking Jordans like this, it's a little bit different.
Well, this is like a super premium image, though, and I think that puts it like more in reach, I think, for a lot of people who are just coming into CG, probably, and a lot of people who watch your tutorials, is they're like not expected to be CG gurus like right off the bat or after they watch your tutorials. You're showing them how to like get these really incredible results from C4D, but then jump in and keep like making the creative like decisions and moving forward in like the most efficient way, it seems.
Definitely. And I really believe in playing off your strengths. I can do very extensive, amazing work in Cinema 4D, it doesn't have to be difficult and complex all the time. Understanding what resources are available to you, how to use those, and then how to finish a project is highly important. I mean, that's how we get paid, we have to understand what a client wants and be able to make it happen. And sometimes it doesn't mean that you have to go 2, 3, 5, 10 years in one specific realm of the art. Like you can be a badass after 6 months. Like it doesn't have to be super complicated.
Well, this is like the Swiss Army knife approach. So it's like if people already know Photoshop a little bit, they've already got a head start for learning this way of making art with C4D.
Definitely.
Stitch drop. Yeah, so you're just pushing those back with a curve.
Yep.
The stitches.
I'm just using the
And did you get like a mask for that? How'd you create that mask?
So that was actually what we call a material ID. Every material in your scene will be given a certain color. Mm-hmm. And so it's very easy to go through with, either the color range selection or the wand tool and just select all of that material at once. And so for this one here, it was very much that type of process. I selected a couple different colors out of it.
So these are your...
Yep, those are all of the masking or ID passes that were exported for this project. So
do you ever pull these from using the channels to create a mask?
Yeah, definitely. And that's, when I focus on, say, something like a red and a green, there are times where I'll go RGB, like specifically for that. And when you look at something like the material ID down there, that's going to be a little bit different, where you start to get all of the colors.
That looks cool, man.
And yeah, I mean, I
that's
love the way it
art
looks.
right there, yeah.
Right. But this is definitely what I use to be able to pull out things like those stitches, because the process is fairly quick.
Yeah.
And they're not always perfect. I mean, I will say that. You guys can catch this on record. It's not always perfect. You know, there are times where you have to go in and do a little bit more work, whether it's with channels, color range, wand tools. I mean,
Yeah.
select and mask. Like there are times.
Because, I mean, one of the biggest things in retouching is isolations. Isolating different parts of the image, different panels on a shoe, different details. So it looks like you're probably never having to do any clipping yourself.
Very rarely, and especially when it comes to full products, you can just render straight with an alpha channel, and you don't have to worry. I mean, you saw it today. You don't have to worry so much about having the pen tool in hand and going around every piece. And there are times where I still use the pen tool to make certain selections of anywhere on the objects, but that's very local and kind of a very rare instance.
It takes a lot of time, and it's probably the worst thing in retouching.
Yeah.
So if I could get every photograph that had all of this stuff in it for me, it'd be a dream come true.
Yeah, I compare it to doing roto in live action.
Yeah.
When I was compositing in
That's the painful stuff.
Roto. You have to do it. It needs to get done, but it's not a fun process.
You got some podcasts you need to listen to. It's the best time to do it. These are cool. I just love looking at all the weird stuff that you can output. How do you create this?
So this is called a shading normal pass, and what this is all of the information in the scene is given a value. And so we have 3 different axes in 3D. You have your y-axis, which is up and down, your blue axis, which is forward and back, or the z-axis, and then you have your red or your x-axis, which is left and right. And so if you go ahead and click on your channels between the red, green, and blue, you'll see all of the information from these various
That's cool.
parts of that pass.
Yeah.
And so the cool part about this is that you can actually use this pass. This is hands down one of my favorite passes when it comes to product work. And if you say make a small flaw in your 3D render with lighting, and you're like, well, I wish I had a little bit more of a rim light, say on the left shoe there, and I just wanted a rim coming across there, it's very easy to invert this blue pass here, or take the red channel up there and just invert that, and now you can get to having quite a bit more information than what you had previously.
Wow, that's cool.
And so now you can light both of those shoes, and this we call it relighting with normals, because you can start to really pull a lot of information just off of this one pass.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, so I think a lot of people probably, many retouchers who don't get a chance to work on a lot of CG would look at something like this, and this would be good information for them. Is you have a single output layer. Is that a material ID, or is that?
No, it's actually called a shading normal.
It's just called a shading normal.
Yeah, it's just its own cool form, and they have multiple different versions of these in 3D of that one pass. But it's definitely I would still consider it more of an info channel. It just gives you information based off of that scene.
Well, this is why I like it so much too, because it is like kind of a Swiss Army knife, right? You've got within just this layer, by virtue of the channels, essentially, you've got 3 different, completely different, basically masking tools you can use in here times 2, because you can invert them.
Definitely.
So,
and you can there are actually ways that you can use this and essentially hue shift it. And so you can just rotate your light around and select the direction for that. So if you, just go ahead and put a hue saturation up there and just slide that.
And just.
So, yeah, and you can really start to pull out different areas of the image. And so same thing, if you go ahead and maybe reset the hue and you go to the saturation, And now go ahead with that one.
Up or down?
Actually, go ahead and select the green channel.
Okay.
One of the channels. It doesn't really matter here.
Oh, I have this as a...
Oh, I see. Yeah, you got to make it.
I have to apply it to the channel directly.
So you can do that, or you can just go ahead and make it a smart object.
Okay.
Then place your hue saturation. This is how I've done it.
Cool. What do you do next?
So if you go ahead and place a hue saturation adjustment, so just Control or Command U. Like it'll
Wait,
be
are you for sure you teaching me Photoshop right now?
I don't. Sorry.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, this is like
But, yeah.
this is it. Like I even like down to keyboard shortcuts. Like I'm like.
Yeah. So go ahead and delete
more.
the adjustment layer there.
Oh, delete that.
Yep. And so this will save you kind of a layer.
Control Shift U.
No, just Control U. Okay. So go ahead and apply that. Just go ahead and click OK first. And now with the smart filter. Now select your green channel, or your red or blue, whatever. It doesn't matter. Now go ahead and double click the smart filter. Now go ahead and start sliding your hue or your saturation, and you'll start to see what that adjustment really can start to look like. So this is controlling pretty much your intensity at this point with the saturation.
Wow.
Yeah, I learned this from like one of my visual effects supervisors, like way
This is a good trick.
ago. But this was we did it in Nuke. It was with a hue shift, and I kind of was like, oh, we could do this in Photoshop too.
Yeah, because I wouldn't expect, like intuitively to see any change in like a black and white image if I'm changing saturation, right? But it's that you're just basically targeting that green channel.
So
right?
if you change the hue now, so you can just move that out of the way, move the whole window out of the way a moment, so you can see what it's doing there.
Cool.
Go ahead and just slide it. And now you can start to really target and hone in on certain areas. And this is where the power of relighting with normals comes in. Like you can select any of these based off of the green channel. The way that I actually use it the most is I find the channel that in the raw pass is close to where I want that light to go, and then adjust from there.
Right.
But you can pull a full adjustment with any of them.
That's crazy. And that's like a super flexible workflow for it too.
Yeah, and so now at this point, if you were to click OK, you would just go ahead and select your green channel there. Just Command or Control click the thumbnail
to create a selection.
Yep, and then you would just go ahead all the way down to the bottom and just make that a new alpha, and so you can store that right in your library.
So you're going to create
next one there. No, one to the left. There you go. And so now you have that specific alpha that you can use anytime that you're going to need it. And so if you go from the Y pop up at the top and click on that one down to the alpha that you just created, those are the two differences in that pass just based off of your small adjustments that you made.
Oh, wow.
And so it's, a lot of times for me, it's very rare nowadays that I use them because I've become a lot less nitpicky.
Mm-hmm.
But it was definitely one of the tricks that I used for quite a while.
Yeah, that's a great trick. And I'm guessing this might be a reason why you like staying in 16 is because when you're making these crazy hue shifts on a layer like that, you try to do that in 8, you're probably going to get some banding, right?
Definitely.
Okay.
I do get asked quite often why I don't use like linear workflows and 32-bit workflows in Photoshop, and it just, I mean, you work in 8-bit for a reason.
Yeah.
And I work in 16-bit for a reason, but I couldn't imagine working in 32. I mean, my file sizes already get up there.
There's just no possible way. I mean, I could see for me a sort of hybrid 16:8 workflow in the stuff that you're showing me, because I would still, in a lot of cases, like to have the speed and flexibility of working in 8.
Right.
And the quality of working in 16. I mean, that's what we all want, basically. So if this file itself was in 8-bit and these smart objects you made were in 16, you would still have access to that data, basically.
Right.
You
'Cause
could
always go in.
Yeah, you could go in and you would apply that hue set shift and then create a new channel based on that, come back out into your file.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so these are actually just smoke overlays.
Oh, cool.
So you could probably, if you zoom out just a little bit in the image there,
Oh, yeah.
that'll help you see where those are at.
Cool. So this is the stage where you're starting to like craft the space
Right.
and look at atmosphere. So are these your smoke assets that you use?
Yeah. Now, with these next two, these are a little bit different than the ones that were below those. These are ones that I actually used with that Z-depth pass. And so, you know, most of these 3D passes that, you know, have to do with, say, Z-depth or ambient occlusion or what, you know, any type of masking or targeting specific areas have multiple different ways you can use them. And so for this one here, you know, this is your kind of what would be a standard Z-depth. This is just me masking off that smoke, not just creating an overall, you know, atmospheric perspective, but pushing the detail with that smoke overlay towards the background. And then in the next one up, I went ahead and I inverted that Z-depth, and now I have that foreground information that allows me to use that and push, you know, on both sides there. So
that's great. So I do something similar to that in like any landscape photograph, basically, because what you're doing here, and it's such like a dramatic, you know, shift, you kind of like don't know it up until you throw these on, if you didn't know any better. But like once, because this looks great right here, this image is like killer, you know, and then you throw these on and it's like all of a sudden
boom.
Boom.
Yeah.
Boom is right. And so, you know, I think anytime I'm working on a shot, these are the same steps that I use basically. Is like get everything together one place, give it that like punch, and the image is like formed, and then move into the phase of like expanding the space.
Right.
Or describing the space, basically.
Definitely.
And I'm not lucky enough to have like tools like this that I can just pop out. I basically do this like manually, and I'll clip through everything, create a whole bunch of masks, but it's the same. It's pretty much the same process.
Yeah, I mean, and this is why, you know, why we do speak to, you know, photographers a lot, and you know, even retouchers or, you know, kind of those hybrids a lot about CGI. Like it's just an extension of your skill set. You already know how to retouch. You do the same thing I'm doing. I just am given better tools to start with than the pen tool, you know? And so it definitely makes things easier on the retouching side of it, or, you know, what I call compositing when you're dealing with 3D, but there's definitely so much flexibility here.
Yeah, because you're using the same eye that you would use as a photographer.
Right.
Same concerns. Spatial details, macro, micro, moving through the image and just like getting everything to a point that it's been addressed, basically, and that it's been like directed. Yeah. That's what I always say, like a complete image has sort of every aspect of it accounted for in some way. Like you didn't miss anything, and you chose every part of the image to do something.
Right. And then you move to the fun stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's a cool move. This base grade.
Yeah, and I'd like to do this even if I'm going into, say, Camera Raw or Lightroom or, you know, Capture One, whatever, you know, grading software one would feel like using. I like to use a base grade to really start getting my brain used to seeing colors, especially because this one here was really quite monochromatic, and then, you know, pops of red. So I'm like, I need to know what a few colors are going to be there. And, you know, so in this case, I, again, was able to pull the foreground and the background, separate those for different things using that Z-depth pass.
Yep.
And so it definitely helped quite a bit.
Yeah, so basically you started to introduce like a complementary color scheme, right?
Right.
Yeah, because, I mean, we know that the red pops are going to benefit from having a muted, you know, large area of green, and you put that only behind the shoes there, basically. Yeah, so once again, this is like pretty consistent. It's like color starts to go on top.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So how, like, do you think about base grade? Why do you call it base?
I call it base grade. I also call it a slap grade. I just kind of slap it on there.
Slap
like
on.
it's something to start getting my mind ready for the idea of color being added at the end. You know, for scenes especially like this, it's not always needed. Sometimes I love the color, and you know, say maybe like a sunset image that I have in 3D, and the colors are all great, and you know, I'll just move straight into grading. But with something like this, especially with products and images that need a lot of depth, there are various ways to create that separation. So you can do that with something like atmosphere perspective and smoke, and then you can also do that with color and light, and you know, so
You're working
like,
from contrast to color, and you're
Right.
working to
All the way
define the
up.
space, basically.
Yep.
And the base grade just sets it up for the next step of color, which is what, like more specific or more targeted?
Yeah, definitely. You know, you'll see that as you start to move up. So I don't want to kind of spoil all the way up here because
spoilers.
it definitely.
Wow, that's crazy.
So what I thought at this stage now is that I needed or really wanted a bit more of that mid-ground haze because we got rid of quite a bit of that, and we focused more on the foreground and the background. So I thought that it would be neat to start to play with a little bit more of those reds, but not targeting specifically what's on the product already. And so I just kind of created a small haze and then added lights on top of that.
Yeah, that creates a lot more space back there. Cool. And then you got this. Oh wow.
That's another one of the favorite passes.
That's cool. Man.
So this is called post processing, or you know, other software packages call it bloom and glare. This is just what we would see normally in photography, where you're starting to get those leaks or those blings and glares on certain metals and various surfaces, or you know, light bulbs if you're shooting, you know, in the dark. And obviously I took it a bit more artistic and went straight red with it, but it definitely has, you know, those same, you know, type of properties to them, where it's just giving those brighter portions of light a little bit extra punch, and it always adds atmosphere. So
Yeah, so how did you create the glows themselves? Is that basically a different component within C4D, or did you?
yeah, so it was actually done. Most render engines actually have like a post-processing or a bloom and glare section or option to them. So I just did this in Octane, and really all it is just a power slider for bloom and then a power slider for glare, and then you can like adjust your cutoff or your threshold, you know, with where that happens. And it's based around lighting, so the brightest points in your scene are going to have, you know, those blooms and those leaks to them. So in this case here, it was those emissions, the emissive lights that I had that were all kind of weirdly inside those cubes that were pushing all the light out.
Yeah.
I just kind of went through those and just started to up the power of those lights until I was able to see that glow from them, and then stopped before it really hit everything else.
It's cool. It's really kind of like optically accurate too, isn't it? Like has some, you know, funkiness to it that like looks real. Okay, cool. So you're putting some more shape on the shoes here. Oh wow.
No, those were the two. So yeah, those are actually passes I didn't even use. So this is all in the ACC or the accessory pass folder.
Oh right, we're in that folder.
But I mean, it still looks good. Like we could just leave them on. And this is exactly why I focus so hard, because now it looks, you know, a little bit less like a kind of microchippy kind of cyberpunk area, and then you flip those on and it looks like a city. Like completely looks like a city now.
I'm like loving it up here. That is just incredible. That like looks that looks so cool, and it pushes that stuff and gives such like a sense of scale back.
Yeah,
there.
and this is all information that I just decided that I didn't need to use.
Yeah.
You know, and if
you had more free time, you could explore like about 50 different possible like directions you could take it in from here.
Right.
And this is your final comp, basically.
Yeah, so that's the final comp. I just created a stamp visible and then smart object from there, and then that's just camera raw with the lens corrections. So it's, you know, in CGI especially, we're generally looking to add those lens imperfections, chromatic aberration, grain, you know, those type of things to them, where oftentimes as a retoucher you're probably trying to remove that from photos, and so that just kind of helps add a bit more contrast to it, and give it the final pizzazz.
Well, it helps like integrate everything just like that final step further. So that is kind of the same in retouching, I'd say. Yeah, all along the way, sometimes if we're getting a photo that like the photographer intentionally like introduced a bunch of grain into, because say the client wanted, you know, that vintage look,
right,
and we're like pulling our hair out because I'm like, I can add that later, it's fine, you know. But at the end, it is always that same step of like that unifying, you know, field of grain, basically. It makes us feel just one dial closer to this is real.
For sure. So thanks a lot, Seth, for taking the time to check this all out and sit and go through the file. And,
no, it's great.
You know, hopefully there's a few things that you learned. I've learned a lot from what you do, and, you know, being able to really pick your brain on what your process might look like here.
Yeah.
So
no, this is great. I saw a bunch of stuff that I have done in the past, and then a whole bunch of stuff that you do that is like totally brand new to me. I never even thought of how to use some of these tools that you output. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you took the time. I'm glad that I was able to sit here with you, and we're going to go ahead and end this video. I know we've been chatting for a long time. So for those of you who are interested in this type of work that we're doing here with the Air Dusty shoe, make sure to download the tutorial. It's out, it's free, you don't have to pay for it. If you don't want to go into Cinema 4D and just want to learn the post-production side and how I was doing all of this, go ahead and download that. Make sure to check it out on proedu.com and never stop learning. I'll see you guys in the next video.